welcome to the Talk Spot. This is Marcus, and today I'm joined by Steve Hackett, who was a member of Genesis, who's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and has done numerous solo albums. Steve, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Marcus. Nice to talk to you.
Well, perfect. So tell us a little bit about your background, like what led you into music, and how did you get connected with Genesis and everything, when you began your solo career? Tell us a little bit about your background and everything.
Of course, yeah. My dad was very musical. He played just for fun. He was able to play quite a lot of different instruments. He'd been in the Boys Brigade, played bugle, bit of clarinet, one-finger piano, could whistle a tune and play guitar at the same time. All clever stuff. And I picked up harmonica from him. So from the age of 2, I was trying to play harmonica. And then we have to jump ahead, to when I'm no longer 2 years old, but by the time I'm 20, I got a phone call from Peter Gabriel. I've been advertising myself for about 5 years in the back pages of Melody Maker, and I've been through hundreds and hundreds of musicians, and I joined 1 or 2 bands, made an album with a band called Quiet World, but then I joined Genesis in 1971, right at the beginning, and I was with them up until 1977. We made a whole bunch of albums together. That brings us pretty much up to the present day. I left in 77. I did a whole bunch of different styled solo albums, most of which were rock, but some of which were acoustic. These days, I tend to sort of work with, when I do albums, the last 2 studio albums have 20 people on each album from all over the world. So it's a kind of United Nations approach. People from India, from Azerbaijan, United States, UK, Sweden, Hungary. So that gives you some idea of what I've been up to.
So what was it like at that time when you joined Genesis and when you were with them? What were Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins? What were they like? I mean, obviously Peter Gabriel has the perception, at least at that time, of being in all these outfits and everything like that. What was he like at the time, and what was the vibe of the band, kind of behind the scenes and stuff? Were you having fun? Was everything was it crazy? How would you describe it a little bit?
Genesis was formed at school. They'd already done 2 albums. By the time Phil and I joined, they'd already done, a couple of things. They were up and running. They were doing shows, mainly clubs and colleges. And then Peter Gabriel at that time hadn't really decided to have this kind of theatrical thing. But by the time I'd suggested that we get a couple of things like a mellotron, a synth, and our own light show, because I'd seen bands who had those things, and it made a huge difference to their appeal. And Pete kicked in with this idea of the theatricality, so he started sort of dressing up and enacting the songs, and suddenly we were getting front covers. And then in 1973, John Lennon said that Genesis was one of the bands he was listening to, and the album was Selling England by the Pound, which is one that I'm touring in its entirety. So the first half of my show is solo stuff. Second half is Selling England in its entirety, Selling England plus 1 or 2 things that didn't make it onto the final cut of the album, but to restore a missing scene or 2.
I mean, one thing that's so amazing about you guys, Genesis, is the sound you guys had was so interesting, especially at that time, in the 70s. And I'm sure you've probably been asked a million times about, kind of the difference in sound between when you were there versus kind of more of the, I don't want to say poppy type sound of Genesis in the 80s. Yeah, I mean, you guys, you've created, so many of the members of the band, including yourself, obviously, have just, very interesting sounds and very, one of my favorite songs of all time is, In Your Eyes by Peter Gabriel. And then, you listen to that and you listen to earlier Genesis stuff, or you listen to Phil Collins stuff, and it's like, wow, all this talent is so diverse. Did you feel when you were there at the time, did it feel like that? Was there ever a struggle with that, with the diversity of sound or anything like that? Exactly how you wanted your songs to be, exactly the kind of style of the songs you wanted to release?
Well, I joined a band that was almost semi-acoustic at that point. We used a lot of 12-string guitars, and many of the songs were very, very quiet, very introspective, and gradually it became rockier. But it was still very English, very eccentric. It very much went its own way. and all the guys in the band were influenced by different things. There was classical influence, there was soul music, there was blues. There were many different styles. Phil loved big band and Tamla Motown. So all of that really went into the mix that was Genesis. Of course, America was a huge influence, but then it was a very English or very European-sounding band. Lots of influence of Vaughan Williams and Prokofiev and the Russians. A lot of stuff that perhaps most rock bands wouldn't have been influenced by. But I think that Tony Banks was, I think, heavily influenced by Procol Harum. Of course, Whiter Shade of Pale, all of that, and Wreck of the Hesperus, and A Salty Dog, that kind of stuff. So there were bands that liked to use chords, and these were the bands that we were listening to. So it was the Beatles, it was certainly Procol Harum, it was certainly acts like King Crimson, and many others that were using this pan-genre approach. So many different styles, sometimes even in the same song, like from Selling England by the Pound, the first track, Dancing with the Moonlit Night, it goes through so many changes, just that one tune alone.
You mentioned that you guys had a very English sound. Would you say the United Kingdom is where you have the highest concentration of your fans? Or would you, I mean, obviously, I looked on your website and you're touring quite a bit, like even the US coming up. I mean, where would you say that you have kind of had the greatest response to your music? Would you say the United Kingdom or America? Or, I mean, I know America's kind of hard because, we have 7 times the number of people that live here than in the United
Indeed.
Kingdom. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's really from all over. I've been in recent years touring extensively from the UK, Europe, Scandinavia, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, many of the South American countries, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Chile, Venezuela, until fairly recently. Been a little bit off the touring map in recent times, but then someone will say, well, there might be a gig in Colombia, and South America, the politics are kind of volatile, and one minute a certain territory might be dangerous to play, another time people will be saying, no, it's calmed down now. Yeah, you might be able to do this, and it all depends how stable things are. Of course, politically, we are living in volatile times, none more so than in the UK right now. It's politics is hotting up, and it's becoming a very dangerous game right now.
You guys just got Boris Johnson, I think. Was that month, within the last month, right? Or maybe a month and a half? Okay.
There's a big fight going on in Parliament because he's trying to override Parliament, and it may well be that parliamentary process gets to override him. So yes, he might get his way. On the other hand, he may have a very short-lived premiership.
Yeah, I saw that in the news maybe the other day. He was asking the Queen to dissolve Parliament. Is that what he?
Yep, that's right. Yeah. And it seems the Queen's gone along with that, but we have to wait and see what happens next week. It'll be a very interesting week in British politics.
Something I also wanted to ask you about was how would you say, I guess I'm trying to think of how to describe it, like, what are some of the biggest changes, or just maybe even in the economy of the music industry versus when you started versus to today? So, for example, I have a friend who was in the Pat Metheny group, and I've talked to him extensively about basically the difference between the music industry when he started, which I believe they got started in the 70s, a little probably after, mid 70s, something like that. And he's talked to me a lot about how, basically the whole middle class virtually of musicians is kind of gone. And he's talked a lot about the economy and how it's changed and things like that for musicians. Have you kind of seen that? I mean, obviously there's been a huge seismic shift in sounds. I mean, unfortunately, in my opinion, I feel like bands, they're just not as prevalent as they used to be, at least in American music. I mean, it's a lot more solo acts and it's a lot less rock. But yeah, maybe would you mind talking about that a little bit? Maybe the changes in the economy for musicians and maybe even sound.
Well, I think it's always been difficult for musicians to make a living. To make a noise for a living is always going to be a precarious thing, just like actors. But at the same time, the major changes in the business are the fact that we used to tour in order to support albums. Now we release albums which are almost an appendage to the tours, because of downloading, streaming, and the way people access music. But luckily, in the area that I'm in, people still want to buy albums, and the package is important to them. So I think the demographic that listens to this kind of pan-genre approach, experimental music, experimental rock, I think that those people want all the information they can get about something that may affect them very, very deeply. So I'm very proud of that, to have had the ear of people, as I say, like John Lennon with the Genesis thing, and then to have Bruce Willis come along to our New York shows, which has been just amazing. So that's rather wonderful, and I suspect musicians always do what comes naturally to them, and of course you mentioned Pat Metheny, who's a fine guitarist and tremendous innovator. So that use of guitar synth. It's something, funnily enough, I pioneered a year or two before him, in fact. And then I also found myself pioneering certain guitar techniques right back in 1971, like tapping and sweep picking and octave jumps. I was doing that, all three of those in the first guitar solo on Dancing with the Moon at Night, 1973. Again, comes back to that time when Lennon said he was listening to us. So I think musicians have always got to do what seems to be groundbreaking and they're passionate about. And all of us are lucky, if we manage to find that moment and find that audience. I mean, I remember seeing Bruce Springsteen, years and years ago, playing to maybe 70 people tops in the Armadillo Ballroom way back in the day, and then we were going to be playing there the following day ourselves, So I think that if you stick at it, I think you can go all the way to the top, virtually any age, but I think you make your own luck.
Well, dang. Well, Steve, yeah, I know you got to get going, but I want to thank you so much for coming on. And I mean, yeah, your music, it's incredible. I mean, almost for nearly 50 years, or for 50 years, I mean, people have been listening to your music, interacting with your music all over the world. And that's truly what you've made is really, it's a gift. I mean, obviously.
Well, it's been great. It's been a fantastic ride, and I'm looking forward to coming back and touring all the places that we're doing. And it's been wonderful to talk to you, Marcus. So thank you so very much.
And everyone, we can follow. We can buy tickets to your shows. Can we go to your website?
Yeah, you can go to the website, and it'll give the details of all. So hackettsongs.com is the website, and it'll give you information about this forthcoming tour. We'll be on tour in the States for the best part of a couple of months, then the British tour, and so on, and so it goes. But it's great, and thank you for giving me the time. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Well, hopefully we'll talk to you again sometime, and definitely have a great tour, and thank you for coming on.
Thanks a lot, Marcus. Thank you.
All right, take care.
Cheers.